Hi, I'm Susie Morgan, founder and director of training at Precision EMDR, and I just want to wish you a happy holidays. And I want to give you a gift, and in fact, 12 gifts, because I was trying to be clever and come up with something that kind of went along with the 12 days of Christmas, and have it be applicable even if you weren't watching this at Christmas time, even if you're watching it in June, and certainly applicable even if you don't celebrate Christmas. So here's what we've got. It is the 12 tips of EMDR efficacy. So not festive, but as good as I could come up with. And hopefully by the time that I publish this, I will have come up with something more clever to title it. But that's what we've got for now. And the reason why I thought about doing this was because I have been kind of updating our EMDR basic training page on our website, and was really kind of thinking through ways to, to express the ways that we do things differently at Precision EMDR and the way we train, because we do a lot of things differently on purpose, because we seen how things have been done over the years, and there's just there's a lot of things that have been taught the same way over the years just because it's always been taught that way, when there's ways to do it, I think, more effectively. And I think one of the critical features that we emphasize, I don't know if it's a feature, but it's maybe more of a value system, is that we want to teach people how to think in EMDR and how to think well. So what that means is helping people really understand not just the how of all the procedural steps to standard protocol, but really the why behind each of those steps. Because what that allows you to do is it allows you to dance with EMDR. So I want to walk you through 12 tips that are really kind of about the nuts and bolts of EMDR. And we're going to start a bit with the idea of activation, and then we're going to go into how do you use bilateral stimulation to make it really the most effective it can be, to some pieces around cognitions, and some of that I will warn you in advance will feel a little sacrilegious. EMDR sometimes in the field is handled a little bit like it's a religion, and it's not a religion. It is a powerful clinical tool, and so I'm going to suggest some things that will certainly make some people clutch their pearls, and that's okay. But I want people to be able to think and maybe have some options available to them. So we'll go into cognitions, and then I'll close with a final couple tips that I think can make a difference. So let's get started. And I'll have to reference my notes more than I do sometimes in my other videos because there's 12 things and I don't want to forget anything. So the first one is light it up. So this is something that I am forever grateful to my first trainer, because he really emphasized this in a way that it stuck with me. And I think it made all the difference in me getting really important effects that was able to help me see how powerful EMDR could be from the start. So my original trainer was Philip Manfield, and he referenced something about having had a history of being trained in eidetic psychotherapy, which I don't really know much about, but I remember it being something where he really emphasized this idea that when you're lighting up a memory, it's really critical that you have that client is really immersed in the sights and the sounds and all of that sort of thing, so that it is really able to have a specificity and also an ignition type of experience in the nervous system. And so there's a few things there in that, like the specificity piece, which is this idea of you really want to make sure that you have as much of a clear idea of what memory is being targeted as possible. If it's one of those amalgam memories of things that have happened again and again and again, you still want to be as clear as possible. And what is that representative image? And then when you get to that image, the key is that I really think of is I want to be able to see it in my mind's eye. If the client's describing something and I can't really kind of picture it myself, that means it's not clear enough. And so you really, really want to help them really dial in on what is that image or that other sensory detail in such a way that you can picture it or feel it yourself, and then you know you're there. And then, this is kind of tip number 2, you want to make sure that you are using the TICES process or that assessment phase not as a checklist, but as an ignition process. And so what you're doing is you're making sure that the whole point of it is activation. Yes, you're gathering details and all of that, but you are very specifically arranging things in advance so that once you're lighting up that target, you're lighting it up so then you can just go. So that means you are arranging your BLS, arranging your positioning, doing all that extra instruction stuff all in advance before you get into TICES. Then what you're doing is, you're gathering all your information during TICES, but you're taking good notes while you're doing it so that you have those key words. What was their target? But specifically, what was that image? What was that cognition? Was that emotion or emotions? And what was that body sensation? And you have those written down so that at the very end, if you've had to kind of wander around a little bit, trying to figure out VOC, trying to figure out cognitions, whatever it is, got distracted, whatever, you're able to help them get back into it and really have a whole nervous system embodiment of that memory that you're wanting to activate for reprocessing. And so what that means is that little phrase in the script that talks about that transition between assessment where you're doing the TICES and then you're moving into reprocessing, you're doing that middle phrase, which I'll remind you what it is in a minute, but with the mindset of the whole point of that phrase is activation. So that phrase is where you're saying things like, so I want you to bring to mind that image, that cognition, that emotion, that sensation, and then go. So here's the clincher. Sometimes you should skip that phrase altogether. This is where the sacrilegiousness comes in. But you need to, because the point is activation. So if you have this client and you've gone through TICES and they're tearing up and they're welling up and you can see it, they're feeling it, skip that summary phrase. Go. Just start reprocessing. But if they're not activated in it, you do want to use that phrase, but you do not want to use it in a way that makes your client have to do mental gymnastics. That's going to take them out of the activation. So that's where those good notes come in. So you don't want to be saying something like, all right, client, what I'd like you to do is bring up that image. And then the client has to think, what was my image? What was my cognition? Because you're prompting them just with those words. Instead, you want to have their words ready for them. So you want to be able to very quickly be able to run through their words while you're asking them to bring all that to mind right before you have them jump into trauma memory reprocessing. So you'll be saying something like, okay, I want you right now to bring to mind that image of his eyes, that feeling of I'm not safe, and that fear, and that feeling in your belly and your throat. And now just go. That way, your client is guided into a deepening and doesn't have to do mental gymnastics. All right. So now let's get into a few tips around bilateral stimulation. So there's a few aspects of what makes EMDR memory reprocessing work. And some of it we know from different, areas of research. So that activation piece that we were just talking about, it's been validated by a lot of the work of Bruce Ecker with memory reconsolidation, where he's talking about one of the critical aspects of memory reconsolidation is that we have activation. And that's really critical. So another critical thing that we have learned is the science of working memory taxation. And we can thank Ad de Jong for this and Susie Matheson. I'm saying her name wrong. So Mathiasen, perhaps. So I apologize for that. EMDR 2.0 has helped us see that by adding a lot of working memory taxation tasks, what we're able to do is really get solid, rapid desensitization. And what has also been one of the criticisms is that it really shouldn't be called EMDR 2.0. It should really be called EMD or a version of EMD or maybe EMD 2.0 because it doesn't allow for as much of that reprocessing, as much as that traveling. And so I think it's really critical to take that knowledge and to say, okay, what am I trying to do here with my clients, with my BLS? So it's not about making the bilateral comfortable, as some therapists emphasize that, oh, well, tactile, my clients like it better, so I'm just going to use tactile. That's not a good enough reason. What we want is we want to make sure that we are optimizing their efficiency of processing, but also their efficacy of reprocessing. And so if we really want to rapidly desensitize something because it is really awful, like really, really gory, awful stuff, a lot of times you want to maximize that working memory taxation in that EMDR 2.0 type of way as much as you can, because you want to bring it down. But if you're wanting to make sure that there's traveling that happens, that you're traveling down those channels of association, and that you're really kind of optimizing how much of that adaptive information can come on in, well, then we want to allow for a bit less taxation, but not so little taxation that we're just kind of stalling out there and going really slow, because that's not best for our clients either. So it's all about understanding this idea that we want to have sufficient working memory taxation to accomplish our goal, but not too much that we actually take away some of the benefit of what we're able to do with standard EMDR processing. So tip 4 is actually based on a modification that I developed to what I was doing in my office after learning of EMDR 2.0 back in 2019. I think was the first time I heard of it when Adjong did his plenary speech at the EMDRIA conference. And so at the time, I had my clients using the little buzzers that had lights on it. And what I'd been having them do was to do eye movement with the buzzers. So they were holding the buzzers that had lights and then following the lighting up with their eyes. So they got the benefit of both the eye movement and the tactile when they were in my office. And so when I came back from that, I was like, I could turn this into a bit more of a task for my clients and increase that working memory taxation. And so I said, okay, I want you to now pinch in accordance with that buzzing and the lights. And so they had to match their pinches with the lights. And what I noticed is they started to actually process more rapidly, more efficiently. So it was really, really cool. And then when I came home from the office, like we all did because of COVID and all of that, what I did was, I couldn't have the buzzers anymore. So I modified what I was doing and created something I call the triangle version. Again, not a clever title, but it's a triangle. So that my clients online could get that benefit of that increased working memory taxation and the combination of tactile and eye movement at home. And then I also didn't run into the weird glitches that can go along with using electronic BLS in different size screens and all of that sort of thing. So I have my clients use their own bodies as their own source of bilateral stimulation. And then on the screen, I need to see a triangle. So it's the top of their head to their hands. And I have them rest their hands on pillows or things like that so that I can see their hands and they don't go, dipping down below where I can see them. But then what they do is they pinch in a rhythmic way, and we figure out the pace together. But then they follow that with their eyes as we process, and then I tell them when to stop. And what that has allowed us to do is really optimize that working memory taxation while we're doing BLS online. And so I invite you to try that, because the feedback I've gotten is that it ends up being pretty easy for clients to adopt, and they tend to have pretty good results overall with it compared to having to juggle a lot of different systems and things. Now, if they can't do eye movement, you can also just do fancy patterning of hand pinches back and forth. So speaking of that, one of the things that I have really emphasized for a long time is this idea that the research does show us that the eye movement is more effective. But if we are having them do eye movement, we oftentimes run into this idea where they think, oh, I can't do that. That's too hard. Like I can't juggle in that way. So one of the things that I do to sort of circumvent this is from the very beginning, I just ask them to do the motion. And then I ask them while they're doing this, while they're doing their eye movement back and forth, to think of an apple. And they do that for a few sets. And then I ask them what color the apple is. That question and their ability to say, it's green, it's red, it's speckled, it's a gala, I don't know, whatever it is, it circumvents that idea of like, I can't do eye movement. And it immediately says, I can. It also circumvents this idea of like, but what if I can't visualize, or I can't visualize well, or things like that? Because it tends to be that people who can't visualize that well, they still kind of know what they're seeing inside, even if it's not super, super vivid. And so the fact that they're able to identify what color the apple is, or what kind of apple it is, or whatever it is, also gives us a sense that like, yep, they can do it well enough. And so if they can't do it for a medical reason, that's different. But in terms of actually technically not being able to do the eye movement, that becomes more and more rare. All right, so now moving on to tip 6. Now this is getting into all of the things that can get me in trouble with folks. So validity of cognition. I'm just going to say this. I love to use 0 to 10 rather than 1 to 7. The reason is for years and years and years, I found that, cognitions alone are really tricky. The idea of validity of cognition is really tricky. And so by using 0 to 10, I circumvent this idea that 1 to 7 is even more confusing. Now someone's going to get upset because, well, standard protocol, we use 1 to 7, and all of these magical things have been made up about why 1 to 7 is so important. But really, it was used so that the research on EMDR matched the research and could be compared apples to apples with like cognitive behavioral therapy, a standard Likert score. So if we are not doing research, we are doing EMDR therapy on our office. If we modify the scale and we note it as such in our notes, then it's clinically appropriate sometimes to use a variation. One of my consultees, who's a member of our team, uses this idea when her clients get stuck with like, what percentage of you believes this or doesn't believe that, which I think is a beautiful modification. Something similar to what we would do with kids, because we're trying to get at the issue, the real issue, but we're not getting stuck on some number scale that doesn't matter. And just so you know, 0 to 10 has the same sort of odd or even or whatever it is as 1 to 7. So it's fine. It doesn't change anything in any meaningful way when you're working clinically. Now, if you're doing research, it's a whole different thing. Stick to 1 to 7. All right. And then also, when we are looking at cognitions, I think it's really, really critical that we allow our clients to use their own words for the cognitions. I love to give the good solid cheat sheets of like all the potential cognitions. But if your client has something that they come up with that feels really deeply meaningful to them and like it nails the meaning of the memory to them, they do not need to match it to something that's on the sheet. The reason why I get really adamant about this is because in my original training 20 years ago, I had someone say, like, you can't use that cognition. It's not on the sheet. And that was when I was the client in the practicum. And I remember it feeling so awful because I was like, but that is what I believe about myself. And I know subsequently it follows the rules. So here's the thing. If your client is coming up with a phrase of their own, you can't just accept anything. It does need to follow the rules. It needs to be self-referencing. Negative cognition needs to be distorted. Positive cognition needs to be reality-based. So no matter what, it's self-referencing. And it's either negative cognition is distorted, positive is reality-based. And it needs to be generalizable. So it can't just be something that's so specific to that particular situation. But as long as it follows those rules, it's whatever is most meaningful to the client, whatever nails it for the client. All right. So now gift number 8. I haven't been doing a great job of numbering these. So I think it's also really important not to organize treatment according to the categories of safety, responsibility, powerlessness, whatever that were Francine Shapiro's original like categories or plateaus of meaning, as they're called. The reason is because you need to listen to your client. And so sometimes they can have 2 very strong beliefs within what would be one of those original categories, but they mean things that are very different to the client. So I'm not in control and I'm powerless could actually mean something very different to the client. I'm unlovable or I'm worthless could mean something very different to the client. And so they could have a whole cluster of memories that surrounds one of those and a whole cluster of memories that surrounds the other, but they're in the same category, in terms of Francine Shapiro's original kind of categories. And if we just broad stroke it because of those original categories, then we're missing really, really that nuanced understanding of what their nervous system and their brain has done in order to organize their maladaptive learning. So it's much more important to organize according to our clients' meanings, not those original categories. All right, now number 9. This is going to get tricky. So I love a good cognition on a reevaluation. Yep, I do. A negative cognition sometimes and a positive cognition. And I've heard all the arguments and even Francine's arguments for why we don't need to do that. But there are some clients that they really don't activate what's left of that trauma memory node unless we bring in the cognitions. And so it can work to say something like we were originally working on I'm worthless and we're working towards I'm worthwhile. Where are you at with that? 0 to 10. Again, not using the 1 to 7 sometimes, but regardless. So in that way, we're able to really, really see if there's anything left there rather than just doing the like just bring up the image and bring up the emotion. Without bringing up that meaning, we don't end up fully activating it and really getting at everything. And so yes, and I left off the body too, but yes, like adding that meaning sometimes can really, really make sure that we get to what we need to get to. And just so you know, somewhere deep inside Francine Shapiro's book, which I had to like go over backwards and forwards in every detail when I was writing our curriculum for Precision EMDR, she does say, despite all these things in terms of the lore of like, do not bring up the cognitions and reevaluation. She's like, it can be useful to do a BOC when you're doing reevaluation. So just so you know, even the queen herself has said that sometimes checking the cognitions can be useful. So, all right. And then one more thing about the negative cognitions and positive cognitions and all of that is definitely going to shock a few people is I think it is not critical that we make our clients only activate one cognition when we are developing a TICES out for a target memory. I think it can be incredibly useful to let them identify any negative cognition that is associated with that memory. And then we just make sure we have corresponding positive cognitions and VOCs on those. The reason is that throughout Francine's book, again, she talks about the fact that other cognitions could be acting as blocking beliefs. Other cognitions could be preventing that memory from being finished out, from being completely reprocessed. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why we're so against gathering that information from the beginning. The other thing is then when you do those little reevaluations sometimes, and you're saying, okay, this cognition is golden. The client's like, yeah, that feels totally resolved. They're like, but this one's still stuck. Then you're able to really use that reevaluation in this really lovely, streamlined way in order to say like, okay, like this is what's left to process here. And we can move through that and be much more efficient with it. I would rather know things up front than run into them on the back end. And so this is a way that I think is a very easy and I think kind of honestly common sense way to do that, rather than to make our clients pigeonhole themselves into only choosing one cognition when oftentimes with memories, there's more than one that they're dealing with. All right, so 2 more little gifts here. The last one, number 11, is go further than you think is possible. I have heard it said sometimes when people are, asking about kind of those end moments of, finishing, processing a memory. Like, do you think that cognition has gone as far as it can go? Do you think that that it's as true as it can be, as true as it can feel? Do you think it's as, like kind of neutralized as it can be, as opposed to really, really pushing that envelope? Because what I found over the years is that oftentimes it's in those few sets after it seems like it's like, I can't imagine this being under a 2. Or I can't imagine this feeling, this positive cognition feeling all the way true. A 6 feels like as far as it can go. It just does. It just seems logical. When we go past the logic and we just do those few more sets, we just keep going, that's when it's like, poof, 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 poof. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's when I get chills oftentimes. It's because it went further. It got deeper. It got bigger. It got brighter, whatever it is. And so always go further than you or the client thinks is possible, because chances are there's real magic that can happen. And last of all, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but take good notes. One of the things that hurt me the most was I was doing EMDR with someone as I was the client. And in order to protect me and my clinical, privacy or whatever, they didn't take good notes. And so then they weren't able to reference back what we had been working on. And I needed them to support me in that way. I needed them to hold me, right? Because I was holding all my clients. I needed them to hold me and my story and my work. And so many times, when you're working with clients, if you're able to pick up that turn of phrase or that piece of the memory or that sort of thing and be able to note that or reference it or talk about it or further, extrapolate other things that need to be targeted, whatever it is, those notes honor your client's process. And so I know there's so much like worry and concern about privacy and confidentiality, and all that's valid, but you also need to weigh that against clinical efficacy and really doing your best work for your client. And I know my brain, I am not AI. I am not a computer. I cannot hold all the details, but if I write them down, I can recall those details and I can use them strategically. And so that's my last gift to you, is a bit of advice that says take good notes. So anyways, happy holidays, or if it's way past the holidays, I hope you had happy holidays, and I hope these gifts keep on giving with your clients. I'd love to hear you if you try them, or if you have, concerns about anything that I've said. Let me know. Communicate with me. You can comment here. You can send me a message on my email, or follow me on Instagram at precisionemdr.com or at precisionemdr. The website is precisionemdr.com. And make a comment, share a thought, like that sort of thing. Send me a message. I would love to communicate with you. And if you want more of these sorts of things, the nuanced tips, or the bigger in-depth stuff, join us for one of our trainings. I would love to see you there.